What if you reached the top of the world and decided you wanted out? For some country music stars, the spotlight was too bright, the road was too long, or the personal cost was just too high. These are shocking reasons why some of Nashville's brightest lights decided to just fade away. Wait till you hear about the man whose car crash changed everything. 1. Bobbie Gentry. Let's kick things off with the biggest mystery in country music history. In 1967, a singer named Bobbie Gentry released a song that took over the world. Ode to Billy Joe was a haunting story about a boy who jumps off the Tallahatchie Bridge, and it left everyone asking one question: what did Billy Joe and his girlfriend throw off that bridge? The song was a monster hit, knocking the Beatles out of the #1 spot and selling over 3 million copies. Bobbie became an international superstar, hosting her own television shows in the US and the UK and performing to sold-out crowds in Las Vegas. She was beautiful, talented, and had a mysterious aura that fans loved. Then, in the early 1982nd, she just vanished. And we mean completely. She gave her last known interview in 1982 and has not been seen or heard from publicly since. There was no farewell tour, no press release, nothing. She simply walked away from her fame and fortune and never looked back. For decades, journalists have tried to find her with no luck. Reports say she lives a quiet life somewhere in the South, completely uninterested in her old career. Her vanishing act is so complete that she's become a legend, a ghost who left behind one of music's greatest unsolved mysteries. Bobbie Gentry chose to disappear, creating a mystery that lasts to this day. But our next star was a legend whose own final hours are a puzzle that experts are still trying to solve. 2. Hank Williams. You can't talk about country music without talking about Hank Williams. He's the original superstar, the man who wrote the rule book for country songwriting. With heartbreaking songs like I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry and Your Cheatin' Heart, he became a massive star in the late 1942nd. He sold millions of records and was the biggest name at the Grand Ole Opry. But truth be told, his life offstage was a mess. He struggled with a painful back condition and the personal demons of addiction, which made him unreliable. The Opry, the most respected stage in country music, even fired him in 1952 for his behavior. The real vanishing act happened on New Year's Day, 1953. Hank was scheduled to play a show in Canton, Ohio. He hired a college student to drive him through the night. But somewhere along the road in West Virginia, Hank Williams passed away in the backseat of his blue Cadillac. He was only 29 years old. The official cause was heart failure, but the details surrounding his final hours are cloudy. Was he given improper medical care by a fake doctor? What really happened in that car? His sudden and mysterious end turned him from a star into an American icon, a ghostwriter on a lost highway whose legend only grew after he was gone. Hank Williams became a legend after his mysterious passing. Our next artist was on the path to becoming a legend himself before his life was cut short in a similarly tragic way. 3. Keith Whitley. In the late 1982nd, a new voice emerged in country music that was pure magic. Keith Whitley was the real deal. He had a voice that could make you feel every single word he sang. After years of playing in bluegrass bands, he finally broke through as a solo artist. His album, Don't Close Your Eyes, was a massive success, producing 3 straight #1 hits, including the iconic title track. He married another country star, Lori Morgan, and was on track to become one of the all-time greats. Everyone believed he was the future of traditional country music. But here's where the story takes a heartbreaking turn. Keith had been fighting a private battle with alcoholism for years. He tried his best to hide it, but it was a powerful demon. On the morning of May 9, 1989, at the absolute peak of his career, Keith Whitley lost that battle. He was found at his home, having passed away from alcohol poisoning at just 34 years old. He had a blood alcohol level that was unbelievably high. His vanishing was so shocking because he was on top of the world. He had 2 more hit songs released after his passing, making his absence from the charts and the stage feel even more profound. He disappeared just as he was arriving. Keith Whitley's story is a tragedy of a star taken too soon. But what about a star who had a brush with tragedy and decided to vanish on her own terms? 4. Barbara Mandrell. For a while, there was no bigger star in music than Barbara Mandrell. She was a powerhouse. She could sing, play a dozen different instruments, and had a stage presence that was electric. Throughout the late 72nd and early 82nd, she was everywhere. She had 6 #1 hits, including Sleeping Single in a Double Bed and I Was Country When Country Wasn't Cool. Her television show, Barbara Mandrell and the Mandrell Sisters, was watched by 40 million people a week. She won the Country Music Association's Entertainer of the Year award 2 years in a row, a feat no woman had ever achieved before. She was on top of the world, and it seemed like she would be there forever. Then, on the 11th of September, 1984, everything changed. Barbara was in a serious car accident that left her with multiple fractures, a concussion, and memory loss. The recovery was long and difficult, and it gave her a new perspective on life. She realized that her career had taken over everything. So, in 1997, at the height of her renewed popularity, she did something unthinkable. She announced her retirement. She played one final sold-out show, said goodbye to her fans, and simply walked away. She sold her tour bus, her instruments, and never performed professionally again, choosing a quiet life with her family over the roar of the crowd. Barbara Mandrell walked away after a terrible accident gave her a new look at life. Our next artist also vanished after a crash, but his story has no answers, only questions. 5. Jim Reeves. They called him Gentleman Jim for his smooth, velvety voice and dapper style. Jim Reeves was one of the architects of the Nashville sound, a new style of country music that was smoother and more pop-friendly. It worked like a charm. He scored more than 50 top 10 hits, with classics like He'll Have to Go, which was a massive international success. He was a huge star not just in America, but all over the world, especially in places like South Africa and Norway. He was a global ambassador for country music. He was also a licensed pilot and loved to fly his own single-engine plane. On the 31st of July, 1964, Jim and his business manager were flying back to Nashville. They flew into a violent thunderstorm and radioed the airport for help. Then, the radio went silent. The plane had vanished from the radar. For 2 days, a massive search was launched involving hundreds of volunteers, including fellow country stars. They finally found the wreckage just a short distance from the airport. Jim Reeves was gone at the age of 40, but here's the strange part. Even after he was gone, his career didn't stop. His wife kept releasing his unreleased songs, and he continued to have hits for another 20 years. He had more posthumous hits than almost any other artist, a ghost on the radio who never really left the charts. The mystery of Jim Reeves's plane crash is chilling, especially because another country superstar vanished in almost the exact same way just a year earlier. 6. Patsy Cline. Before there was Reba, Dolly, or Taylor, there was Patsy Cline. She was a trailblazer for women in country music. With a powerful, emotional voice that could break your heart, she sang timeless classics like Crazy, written by Willie Nelson, and I Fall to Pieces. She was one of the first country stars to cross over to the pop charts, and she did it with style and attitude. She demanded respect, better pay, and creative control in a male-dominated industry. She was tough, funny, and incredibly talented, becoming the first solo female artist inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. She had also survived a terrible car crash in 1961 that left her with serious injuries. She told friends she felt like she was living on borrowed time. On the 5th of March, 1963, that feeling came true. After playing a benefit concert in Kansas City, she boarded a small private plane to fly back to Nashville with fellow stars Hawkshaw Hawkins and Cowboy Copas. Just like Jim Reeves's flight, they flew into bad weather. The plane went down in a forest in Tennessee, and everyone on board was lost. Patsy was only 30 years old. Her vanishing was a massive blow to the music world. She was just hitting her stride, a revolutionary artist whose dream of a long career disappeared in a flash of lightning. Patsy's story is one of a bright future cut short. Our next star also vanished quietly, but he did it by choice, leaving fans wanting more for years. 7. Don Williams. In a world of rhinestone cowboys and loud outlaws, Don Williams was an island of calm. They called him the Gentle Giant for his imposing height and his warm, gentle voice. Starting in the 1972nd, he had a string of hits that felt like conversations with an old friend. Songs like I Believe in You and Tulsa Time were simple, honest, and full of heart. He racked up 17 #1 hits and was beloved around the world. He was known for his signature look, a simple hat and a denim jacket, and he always sat on a stool to sing, creating an intimate feel even in big arenas. Unlike many stars, Don was a very private person. He wasn't comfortable with the fame and the celebrity lifestyle. So, in 2006, he did something that surprised everyone. He announced a farewell tour and retired. He just wanted to go home and live a normal life. For a few years, he stuck to it. He came back for a short time around 2012, releasing a couple of albums to the delight of his fans. But then, in 2016, he vanished from the stage for good, announcing he was officially done with performing. He passed away peacefully a year later, in 2017. His disappearance from music wasn't tragic or mysterious. It was a quiet, graceful exit from a man who gave us decades of beautiful music and then decided he was done. Don Williams chose to walk away into a quiet life. But for our next star, her vanishing act was anything but quiet, involving financial ruin and a truly bizarre, tragic end. 8. Dottie West. Dottie West was a country music queen. She was one of the first women to win a Grammy for Best Female Country Vocal Performance in 1965. She had a successful career for decades, but in the late 72nd and early 82nd, she reinvented herself. She teamed up with Kenny Rogers for a series of hit duets like Every Time Two Fools Collide and adopted a glamorous, hot image. She was a huge star all over again, known for her sparkling stage outfits and her powerful voice. She was living the high life, a true country music diva. But behind the scenes, things were falling apart. Dottie was generous to a fault and made some very bad financial investments. By 1990, she was forced to file for bankruptcy, owing millions of dollars. The IRS seized and auctioned off her mansion and her belongings. It was a stunning and public fall from grace. She was working on a comeback album and trying to get her life back on track. On the 30th of August, 1991, she was scheduled to perform at the Grand Ole Opry. Her car broke down on the side of the road. An elderly neighbor gave her a ride, but he was driving too fast and crashed. Dottie's injuries didn't seem too bad at first, but days later, she passed away in the hospital from a ruptured liver. She vanished from the world in a twist of fate, a story of riches to rags with a heartbreaking final chapter. Dottie West's fall was sudden and tragic. The next artist on our list also had a tragic end, but his was a slow fade that ended in a dark place. 9. Faron Young. Faron Young was one of country music's original honky-tonk heroes. Nicknamed the Young Sheriff, he was a huge star in the 52nd and 62nd with a swagger and a smile that charmed audiences. He had a string of massive hits, including the iconic Hello Walls, another classic written by Willie Nelson. He had nearly 40 top 10 hits over his long career, invested his money wisely, and even started a famous country music newspaper. He was a pillar of the Nashville community, known for his generosity and his wild personality. He was a star who seemed like he would last forever. But as the 72nd and 82nd rolled on, his style of music fell out of fashion. The hits stopped coming. Faron became bitter and started to feel like the industry he helped build had forgotten him. He struggled with depression and alcoholism, and his behavior became more and more erratic. He was still a beloved figure, but the spotlight had moved on. In the mid-92nd, with his health failing and feeling deeply depressed about his lost career, he made a tragic choice. In December of 1996, Faron Young ended his own story. His vanishing was a slow, painful fade from the top of the charts to a place of deep despair, a sad final chapter for a man who had brought so much joy to his fans. Faron Young's fade from the spotlight was painful. Our next star was the First Lady of country music, but her final years were also filled with pain and mystery. 10. Tammy Wynette. Tammy Wynette was country music royalty. Known as the First Lady of country music, she sang some of the most iconic songs in the genre's history. Stand By Your Man is a song known around the globe. She lived a life that was like one of her songs, full of love, heartbreak, and drama. Her stormy relationship with fellow superstar George Jones was legendary. She sold over 30 million records and won 2 Grammy Awards. Her voice, full of what she called a teardrop, was unmistakable. But for all her success, her life was plagued by serious health problems. She endured dozens of surgeries and was in constant pain, which led to a long-term struggle with pain medication. The last years of her life were a mystery. She claimed to have been abducted from a shopping mall, a story many people found hard to believe. On the 6th of April, 1998, the world was shocked to learn that Tammy Wynette had passed away in her sleep at just 55 years old. The official cause was a blood clot, but her daughters were suspicious. They later had her body exhumed for another look. The final report said she passed from a heart issue, but the questions and controversy surrounding her final days and her health have never fully gone away, leaving her departure from the world shrouded in a sad mystery. Tammy Wynette's story is full of drama, but our next artist story is even wilder, involving a promise to a friend and a legendary rock and roll vanishing act. 11. Gram Parsons. Gram Parsons is a name that true music nerds whisper with reverence. He was never a mainstream superstar, but his influence is massive. He was the brilliant mind who basically invented country rock music. He took the honesty of country and blended it with the energy of rock and roll. He played with the Byrds and the Flying Burrito Brothers before starting a solo career where he discovered and sang with a young Emmylou Harris. He was handsome, talented, and had a vision for what he called cosmic American music. He was a pioneer who was years ahead of his time. Gram also lived the rock and roll lifestyle to the fullest. On the 19th of September, 1973, after finishing his second solo album, he passed away in a motel room near Joshua Tree National Park. He was only 26 years old. But here's where his vanishing gets truly bizarre. Gram had told his road manager, Phil Kaufman, that he wanted his body to be cremated in Joshua Tree. When Gram's family arranged to fly his body home to Louisiana for a traditional burial, Kaufman decided to honor his friend's wish. He and a friend stole the casket from the Los Angeles airport, drove it back to the desert, and set it on fire. It was a chaotic, legendary, and illegal final act for a musician who lived and vanished outside the rules. Gram Parsons' story is one of rock and roll excess. Our next outlaw singer also lived outside the rules, and it led to him vanishing from society for a while. 12. Johnny Paycheck. If you're looking for a country outlaw, look no further than Johnny Paycheck. He had a tough, gritty voice and a reputation for being a troublemaker. For years, he was a respected but not very successful artist. Then, in 1977, he released the song that would define his career. Take This Job and Shove It became an anthem for working people everywhere. It was a massive #1 hit and made him a superstar. He leaned into his outlaw image, singing songs about drinking, fighting, and living hard. The problem was, his outlaw image wasn't just an act. Johnny Paycheck lived it. He struggled with addiction and had numerous run-ins with the law. The real trouble started in 1985. In a bar in Ohio, he got into an argument with a man and ended up shooting and grazing him. Paycheck claimed it was self-defense, but he was convicted of aggravated assault. After years of appeals, he was sentenced to prison. The man who sang "Take This Job and Shove It" had vanished from the music world and was now an inmate. He served 2 years before being pardoned by the governor of Ohio. He tried to make a comeback, but his career never recovered from the scandal and his time away. Johnny Paycheck's outlaw life got too real. The next star on our list was a lady of the 82nd who burst onto the scene, conquered it, and then quietly vanished. 13. K.T. Oslin. In the 1982nd, country music was full of young new talent. And then came K.T. Oslin, who broke all the rules. She was in her mid-40s when she got her record deal, an age when many artists are considered past their prime. Her songs were different too. They were smart, funny, and told stories from a modern woman's point of view. Her first big hit, "80s Ladies," became an anthem for a generation of women. She won 3 Grammy Awards and was the first female songwriter to win the CMA Song of the Year award. She was a fresh, powerful voice and a true original. She had a string of hits in the late 82nd and early 92nd, but then she started to disappear from the public eye. In 1995, she was diagnosed with a serious heart condition and had to undergo major surgery. After that, she decided to step back from the music business. She released an album in 2001 and then another in 2015, but she never returned to full-time touring or recording. She was later diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. K.T. Oslin's vanishing act was a quiet retreat, a choice made to protect her health. She burst onto the scene like a firecracker, lit up the sky, and then chose to fade out on her own terms, leaving behind a small but perfect collection of brilliant songs. K.T. Oslin vanished for health reasons. Our next star was a rhinestone king who was pushed out of the spotlight by changing times and his own wild lifestyle. 14. Webb Pierce. In the 1952nd, few stars were bigger than Webb Pierce. He was the king of honky-tonk, a flashy showman with a nasal, twangy voice that was pure country. He had more #1 hits in the 1952nd than any other artist, with an incredible 13 chart toppers like "There Stands the Glass." He lived like a king too. He famously had 2 guitar-shaped swimming pools built at his Nashville home and drove a Pontiac convertible decorated with silver dollars and steer horns. He was the definition of country music excess and success. But as the 62nd came around, the Nashville sound, championed by stars like Jim Reeves, started to take over. Webb's raw, honky-tonk style began to sound dated. He refused to change, and his hits started to dry up. His flashy lifestyle and sometimes difficult personality didn't help. He tried to stay relevant, but by the 1972nd, he had largely vanished from the charts. He became a country music relic, a symbol of a bygone era. He spent his later years as a strange Nashville tourist attraction, greeting people at his mansion. His disappearance wasn't sudden, but a long, slow slide from being the biggest star in the genre to being a forgotten king. Webb Pierce's style fell out of fashion. Our next artist was one of the most influential singers ever, but he couldn't escape his personal troubles, which caused his career to vanish. 15. Lefty Frizzell. If you ask country legends like George Jones, Willie Nelson, or Merle Haggard who their biggest influence was, they would all give you the same name, Lefty Frizzell. Lefty had a unique way of singing, bending and sliding his notes in a way no one had ever heard before. It was revolutionary. In 1951, he had 4 songs in the top 10 at the same time, a feat that even the Beatles couldn't match. Songs like "If You've Got the Money, I've Got the Time" made him one of the biggest stars of his day. His vocal style would be copied by generations of singers. But for all his incredible talent, Lefty was his own worst enemy. He was a notorious partier and struggled with alcoholism for his entire adult life. This made him unreliable and difficult to work with. He would miss shows or show up unable to perform. As his reputation soured, his hits dried up. By the 1962nd, the man who had invented a new way to sing had all but vanished from the radio. He had a brief comeback in 1964 with the hit Saginaw, Michigan, but he couldn't sustain it. His demons always caught up with him. He passed away from a stroke in 1975 at the age of 47, a genius who influenced everyone but could never conquer himself. Lefty Frizzell was the very first country star, and his career was cut short by illness. 16. Jimmie Rodgers. To find our next vanished star, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. We're talking about the man they call the father of country music, Jimmie Rodgers. In 1927, at a series of recording sessions known as the Bristol Sessions, Jimmie recorded his first songs. He was a former railroad worker, a brakeman, and his music was a mix of blues, folk, and his signature yodeling. It was unlike anything anyone had heard. He became country music's first true superstar, selling millions of records during the Great Depression. He was known as the Singing Brakeman and was a household name. But Jimmie was racing against time. He had been diagnosed with tuberculosis, a devastating lung disease, when he was a young man. He knew he didn't have long to live, so he recorded music at a frantic pace. His illness gave his voice a sad, fragile quality that made his songs even more powerful. He toured as long as his body would let him. In May of 1933, he traveled to New York for one last recording session. He was so weak he had to rest on a cot between takes. 2 days after recording his final song, Jimmie Rodgers passed away in his hotel room. He was only 35 years old. His career vanished at its peak, leaving a legacy that every country artist since has built upon. Jimmie Rodgers' life was a race against time. The next artist also had a short, bright career that vanished in a storm of very public personal problems. 17. Mindy McCready. In the mid-1992nd, Mindy McCready burst onto the country scene as a fiery, talented young singer. Her debut album, 10,000 Angels, was a huge hit, selling over 2 million copies. Her first single, Guys Do It All the Time, shot to #1. She was beautiful, sassy, and had a powerful voice. It looked like she was on the fast track to becoming one of country's next great female stars, following in the footsteps of Faith Hill and Shania Twain. She had the talent and the charisma to go all the way. But very quickly, her personal life began to overshadow her music. Her story became a sad and public downward spiral. She had a series of tumultuous relationships, troubles with the law, and very public battles with addiction. The headlines were no longer about her music, but about her struggles. Her record label dropped her, and her career completely vanished. She appeared on the reality show Celebrity Rehab, but sadly, she could not find peace. In early 2013, after the father of her youngest child took his own life, Mindy fell into a deep despair. Just a few weeks later, she ended her own story at the age of 37. It was a tragic end for a woman with a world of talent whose bright light was extinguished by darkness. Mindy McCready's fall was fast and public. Our next artist was known as The Voice, but for long periods, that incredible voice fell silent. 18. Vern Gosdin. They didn't call Vern Gosdin The Voice for nothing. When he sang a sad song, you felt it in your bones. He was a master of the heart-wrenching country ballad. After years of struggling in the music business, he finally broke through in a big way in the late 1982nd. Songs like Chiseled in Stone and Set 'Em Up Joe were huge hits and became modern classics. Chiseled in Stone was so powerful, it was voted the CMA Song of the Year in 1989. For a few years, Vern was one of the most respected and successful artists in Nashville. And then, he just disappeared from the charts. After his run of hits, he struggled to get back on the radio. He had a stroke in the early 92nd, which sidelined him for a while. He would release albums, but they didn't get the same attention. He became a bit of a recluse, a legendary voice that you just didn't hear from much anymore. He would pop up for a tour here and there, reminding everyone of his incredible talent, but he never regained the massive success he once had. His career was a strange, vanishing act. A few years of incredible chart-topping fame, followed by long stretches of silence before he passed away in 2009.